Have you ever heard of Keturah? While the story of Abraham and Sarah is widely known, few know about Keturah, the woman who entered Abraham's life after Sarah's death, and who played a crucial role in the continuity of Abraham's descendants. In this video, we will reveal the secrets of this enigmatic figure, exploring her silent but vital importance in the biblical narrative. You'll discover how Keturah and her children helped shape the destiny of many nations, and how, even in the shadows of history, she was essential to the fulfillment of God's promises. If you've ever wondered about the untold stories of the Bible, or if you're looking for a deeper understanding of the lesser-known figures who impacted Abraham's legacy, then this video is for you. Let's together unravel the mysteries of Keturah, Abraham's wife who few know about, but who had a lasting impact on sacred history. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of the biblical productions on this channel. That said, let's get to the story that many don't know about Keturah, Abraham's second wife. After the death of Sarah, Abraham's beloved and faithful wife, the patriarch found himself at a new stage in his life. Sarah, with whom Abraham had shared so many years of joys, challenges, and promises, had passed away, leaving a deep void in his heart. But even in his advanced age, Abraham still had much life ahead of him. He was not destined to spend his final days alone, and it was in this context that Keturah entered his life. Keturah, whose name carries a fragrance of mystery and serenity, emerges almost silently in the biblical narrative. Little is known about her origins, but her presence in Abraham's life marks a new chapter. Despite his advanced age, Abraham found in Keturah not just a new companion, but a woman who would bring him more heirs. They married, and from this union came 6 sons: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Now imagine Abraham, a man who had already lived more than most could imagine, holding these new sons in his arms. Each child represented a new hope, an extension of the legacy that God had promised him. And Keturah, in her role as mother, played a vital role in the continuity of Abraham's descendants. She was not just a secondary figure. She was the mother of these new nations that would one day spread across the world. Zimran, the firstborn, would grow up to be the founder of a people. Jokshan, the second son, would follow the same path, giving rise to new tribes and families. Medan and Midian, the next sons, would be remembered in biblical history as the progenitors of peoples who had significant interactions with Israel. Midian, in particular, would be the father of the Midianites, a tribe that played an important role in future biblical stories. Ishbak and Shua, the youngest sons, would also become leaders of great nations. But who was Keturah? Although the Bible does not provide many details about her personality or her previous history, her importance is undeniable. She is a transitional figure, a bridge between the Abraham of the past, who walked beside Sarah, and the Abraham who now, with Keturah, continues to see God's promise unfold. Amidst the silence of the scriptures, Keturah shines like a star that, though distant, is essential to the firmament. The story of Keturah and Abraham reminds us that a life of faith is full of new possibilities, even when everything seems to have come to an end. In his infinite wisdom, God brought Keturah into Abraham's life to ensure that his servant would not be alone. And so, through Keturah, Abraham's legacy expanded even further, touching future generations and shaping biblical history. With Keturah, Abraham discovered that God's promise was not limited by time or circumstances. It would continue to flourish, even when it seemed that the final chapter had been written. And it is in this context that Keturah, the wife that few know, plays a significant role in Abraham's life. As we delve into the life of Keturah, we realize that her importance goes far beyond the title of Abraham's second wife. Keturah was not merely a companion for the patriarch in his later years. She was the mother of nations, whose descendants shaped significant events in biblical history. Her sons, each with his own destiny, spread out and founded tribes and nations that would leave an indelible mark on the narrative of Israel. Midian, perhaps the most notable of Keturah's sons, gave rise to the Midianites, a nation that would become central at various points in Israel's history. The Midianites, direct descendants of Abraham through Keturah, had a complex relationship with the Israelites. There were times of alliance, such as when Moses found refuge among the Midianites and married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, the priest of Midian. But there were also times of conflict, as during the period of the Judges, when the Midianites oppressed Israel, leading Gideon to rise as a judge to deliver the people. The influence of Midian, Keturah's son, would resonate for generations, showing that Keturah's impact was deep and multifaceted. But it wasn't just Midian who carried Keturah's legacy. Her other sons also gave rise to peoples who, in one way or another, interacted with the nation of Israel over the centuries. Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Ishbak, and Shuah each played their part in expanding what we now call the biblical world. These nations, often situated on the margins of the central narrative, were fundamental in completing the descendants of Abraham, who spread across the world. The interesting thing here is how this promise unfolds in unexpected ways. When God spoke to Abraham, many might have assumed that the lineage of Isaac, the son of promise, would be the only channel through which this promise would be realized. Although these descendants are not part of Isaac's messianic lineage, their presence in the biblical narrative is fundamental for God's sovereign plans to be fulfilled throughout the biblical narratives. Through Keturah and her sons, we see the greatness of God's plan, which goes beyond our expectations. God, in addition to fulfilling his promise in Isaac, also blessed Abraham with other descendants who founded other nations, all linked to the patriarch. And Keturah, as the mother of these nations, played a crucial, though often silent, role in the continuity of this plan. Keturah's legacy, therefore, is not just a secondary aspect of Abraham's life. It is a natural and vital extension in the growth of the peoples of the world. Her sons, though not at the center of Israel's narrative, were agents of God's sovereign fulfillment in history, populating the earth. They expanded Abraham's reach, spreading across vast regions and influencing the course of biblical history. Keturah, with her lineage, ensured that Abraham's promise was not confined to a single nation, but was fulfilled in diverse and comprehensive ways, touching the destiny of many peoples. Abraham, a man deeply connected to God's promise, always knew that his lineage would continue through Isaac, the son he had with Sarah, his first wife. Isaac was the child of the promise, the heir who would carry forward the covenant made between God and Abraham, a covenant that promised descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. But at the same time, Abraham was a loving father who cared deeply for all his children, including those he had with Keturah. However, the patriarch understood that a distinction needed to be made. Isaac was the chosen one, the one through whom the lineage of the promise would be maintained. The Bible tells us that Abraham gave everything he owned to Isaac, ensuring that the child of the promise would inherit not only his material possessions but, more importantly, the spiritual blessing that came from God. Isaac was the bearer of the covenant, the direct link in the chain that would eventually lead to the emergence of the nation of Israel, and later to the promised Messiah. But Abraham did not neglect the children of Keturah. They too were of his blood, and as a caring father he gave them gifts before sending them eastward, away from Isaac. This geographical separation was necessary to ensure that Isaac would remain the sole heir of the covenant, without internal disputes endangering the divine plan, if that were even possible, as our Lord is sovereign over history. Yet this distance did not erase the importance of Keturah's sons. They were sent to the east, to regions that would later be inhabited by tribes and nations that would play significant roles in Israel's history. It is fascinating to note that this separation, while it might seem like a distancing or even exclusion, actually allowed Abraham's promise to expand in diverse and comprehensive ways. Keturah's sons, as they settled in distant lands, began to influence the history of those regions, interacting in complex ways with Isaac's descendants. Their tribes and nations grew and developed, often in parallel with Israel's history, but always connected in some way. This dynamic shows us something profound about God's plan. The covenant he made with Abraham was specific, focused on Isaac, but at the same time, God allowed Abraham's other children to play important roles in biblical history. Through Keturah and her sons, Abraham's legacy extended beyond the borders of Canaan, touching the lives of peoples who, although not part of the direct lineage of the promise, were still connected to the divine plan. Keturah's sons therefore continued the story, establishing their own nations, their own traditions, and in many cases, interacting significantly with Isaac's descendants. Though physically separated, they were never completely removed from the course of biblical history. And so, even amid the clear distinction Abraham made between Isaac and Keturah's sons, we see that the patriarch's legacy unfolds in ways that reflect the greatness and complexity of God's plan. This distinction is a divine organization of the greater plan that God had for Abraham and his descendants. While Isaac bore the mantle of the promise, Keturah's sons were called to expand Abraham's impact in other directions, showing that the reach of God's blessing was, and always will be, far greater than we can imagine. Although Keturah may not hold a prominent place in the biblical narrative like other figures, her story is like an underground current, flowing silently, but with a profound impact on the course of history. Keturah represents something often overlooked. God works through all his children, not just those who are more visible or mentioned more frequently. Through Keturah, we see the extension of God's promise to Abraham, a promise that was not limited to a single line or nation, but expanded to touch many lives and many nations. The descendants of Keturah, scattered throughout the East, formed tribes and nations that, over the centuries, had complex and often conflicting interactions with Israel. These nations, often viewed as antagonists in the biblical narrative, were within God's greater plan. The promise that Abraham would be the father of many nations did not mean he would only father nations at peace with each other, but that he would be the progenitor of peoples who, with all their complexities and conflicts, would fulfill God's purposes in the world. As we have already mentioned, the Midianites, descendants of Midian, son of Keturah, played significant roles in various biblical stories. Although there were moments of alliance, as in the case of Moses and his wife Zipporah, daughter of Jethro, priest of Midian, there were also moments of great conflict, as in the time of Gideon, when the Midianites oppressed Israel. These episodes, however, are not deviations from God's plan, but parts of the intricate mosaic that is the history of redemption. Through these interactions, we see how God shapes and directs history, often using means and people that are not obvious at first glance. Keturah, therefore, is a reminder that God works through figures who may seem secondary or peripheral. She and her children were instruments in God's hands to fulfill the promise to Abraham in ways that perhaps no one expected. The Bible repeatedly shows us that the Lord uses all things and all people to accomplish his purpose. Even when it seems that certain people or nations are distant from the promise, they are, in fact, participating in the grand drama of the story of redemption. Moreover, Keturah's story teaches us something profound about the nature of God's plan. It is not limited by our expectations or understandings. While we may focus on the direct lineage of Isaac, God was also working through Keturah's children to expand the reach of the promise. They are not mere supporting characters, but essential actors in a narrative that is much greater than any of us can comprehend. Thus, Keturah and her descendants challenge us to look beyond the obvious, to perceive that God's plan includes and involves much more than we can see on the surface. Her story is a vital part of the divine puzzle, showing that God is always in control, always guiding his creation toward the fulfillment of his promises, even when the paths he chooses are unexpected. Ultimately, Keturah is a testimony to God's faithfulness to his word. She who began as an apparently secondary figure became a key cog in the wheel of Abraham's successors. And so, through Keturah, we see the fullness of God's plan, which unfolds in silent but powerful ways through all those he calls to participate in his eternal work. Write in the comments, I want to know if you know the story of Keturah, Abraham's second wife. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. God bless your life. See you in the next video.